London, 1821. A city of glittering chandeliers, polished marble floors, and voices sharpened by privilege moved beneath the cold breath of winter. Carriages rattled through the frosted streets, their wheels scattering thin layers of snow as guests hurried toward the grandest event of the season, the Duchess of Gloucester's annual charity ball. Inside that towering manor, where every whisper traveled faster than a candle flame, Lady Amelia Ashford stepped through the entrance and felt the full weight of London society turn toward her. She had dressed with great care, fastening the modest pearls that once belonged to her mother. She hoped they might lend her a measure of strength. Instead, they only made her feel smaller beneath the jeweled scrutiny of women who judged every footstep she took. Amelia knew what they were whispering. She had heard the murmurs long before she crossed the threshold of Gloucester House. Yet knowing did not soften the blow. It only made each word slice more cleanly. There she is, the Ashford girl. Such a pretty thing, poor creature. Imagine being sent to Ravenshire. I cannot fathom it. Amelia kept her chin high, though her heartbeat trembled against the hard bone of her stays. Her father's debts had stripped them of nearly everything in the past 2 years. Their townhouse, their carriages, their place at the safe edges of aristocratic society. Yet nothing had prepared her for the humiliation of this night. Her first public appearance since the announcement of her arranged marriage to the reclusive Duke of Ravenshire. A glitter of silver caught her eye as Lady Henrietta Vale drifted toward her, a woman renowned for cruelty masked beneath charm. Henrietta's smile widened as she reached Amelia, as though she sensed her trembling courage and meant to crush it. "My dear Lady Amelia," she purred, touching Amelia's arm with a gloved hand that felt like ice. "You must be congratulated. Not every girl receives the honor of joining a house as storied as Ravenshire." The pause before honor was deliberate. A small circle of nobles around them leaned closer, eager spectators awaiting spectacle. Amelia managed a polite, "You are very kind," though the words tasted false. Henrietta's eyes gleamed. "Kind? Hardly. Only concerned. The tales one hears about His Grace's family. Well, I suppose you will soon learn them firsthand. The line is known for its tempests, storms of temperament, and tragedies." She pressed a hand to her heart as if mourning some ancient sorrow. "I do hope you have a strong constitution." A ripple of laughter followed, subdued enough to appear civilized, but sharp enough for Amelia to feel every edge. Her cheeks burned. She wanted nothing more than to disappear into the wall tapestry behind her, to slip away from the stares that weighed her like a pawn already sacrificed. But she stood there, spine straight, refusing to crumple. Across the ballroom, candlelight spilled from crystal chandeliers and danced along the musicians' instruments, glowing on silk gowns and polished shoes. Every corner of the room shimmered with life and privilege, yet Amelia felt only the cold. A pair of gentlemen passed behind her, unaware she could hear them. "Poor girl. She'll be sent to a castle filled with ghosts. Have you not heard? The last Duchess couldn't bear it. No one could. And the new Duke? They say he's as silent as stone. Some claim he barely speaks at all." Amelia swallowed tightly, her throat constricting as she turned away. She knew only fragments of the man she was to marry, Adrian Ravenshire, the newly inherited Duke. A man whose family tragedies were whispered across drawing rooms. A man she had never spoken to, never met, yet was expected to share a future with. She had asked her father once, timidly, whether the Duke was cruel. He had avoided her gaze and simply replied, "He is wealthy, and we are ruined. That is all that matters." That answer had haunted her ever since. As music swelled through the ballroom, Amelia drifted toward a row of tall windows, the world outside blurred by frost. Snowflakes spiraled down to the streets below. She focused on the glass, trying to breathe, trying to steady her pulse. The reflection staring back was that of a woman trying desperately not to appear afraid. "Lady Amelia?" She turned, startled, to find Lord Whitcomb, a kindly older friend of her late mother, approaching with genuine concern lining his face. "You look pale, my dear. Is everything quite all right?" Her composure nearly broke at the unexpected kindness. She forced a fragile smile. "I am only tired, my lord. The room is warm." He glanced around at the staring faces, their curiosity barely concealed. "They speak without understanding," he murmured. "The Duke is not the man they imagine. His father's sins were not his own." Emilia's breath caught. It was the first hopeful thing she had heard all evening. "You know him." "Not well," Lord Whitcomb admitted, "but enough to say this: he is more thoughtful than people believe, more burdened than blessed. And above all, he is a man who guards his privacy fiercely. That alone is enough to ignite the gossip of London." Emilia looked down at her gloved hands. "But they say he is cold." "They say many things," he replied gently, "most of them untrue." Before she could respond, a shrill voice sliced across the air. "Lady Emilia, the Duchess wishes to see you." It was Henrietta again, beckoning her with false sweetness. "She plans to announce your departure date for Ravenshire." A murmur rose in the ballroom. Departure date. As if Emilia were not a bride-to-be but a parcel about to be shipped off. Henrietta waited, smug. Emilia gathered her composure and walked toward the center of the ballroom where the Duchess of Gloucester awaited. Her shoes clicked lightly upon the marble floor, each step feeling heavier than the last. She could sense how every eye followed her, a procession of judgment. The Duchess offered a polite smile. "My dear, I understand your journey to Ravenshire begins tomorrow. The weather may be unkind, but I trust you will bear it with grace." Emilia lowered her head respectfully. "Of course, Your Grace." "Good," the Duchess replied, her tone cool but not unkind. "You must do your best to present yourself with dignity. People can be uncharitable." Across the room, someone snickered. Emilia felt tears threaten but refused to let them fall. She curtsied and stepped back, the sounds of laughter and music merging into a painful blur. Conversations resumed, but she still heard the whispers, like the faint hiss of a distant tide, relentless and cruel. By the time she slipped out onto the balcony for air, the cold night struck her skin like needles. She gripped the stone railing, fighting to steady her breath. She had been sold to defeat debts, married off to a man whose reputation terrified her, judged by an entire city before she had even begun her new life. Yet as she stared across London's rooftops glittering beneath winter's moon, a small thought pierced the fog of dread. What if the Duke was not the monster they made him to be? What if there was a truth hidden somewhere among the lies? She closed her eyes, letting the night steady her. Tomorrow she would leave London. Tomorrow she would face Ravenshire. And tomorrow she would meet the man whose name alone caused society to tremble. But tonight she stood alone, humiliated yet unbroken. And though she feared the path ahead, something deep within her insisted on surviving it. The wind tugged at her gown, carrying away the whispers behind her. The whispers that followed her to the altar, but not, she hoped, forever. The journey to Ravenshire began before dawn, when the frost still clung to the carriage windows like lacework spun by ghosts. Emilia sat wrapped in her cloak, hands clasped tightly in her lap as the horses carried her farther from London's familiar clamor and deeper into the silent countryside. Each mile felt like the turning of a page she could not go back to read again. Though she tried to compose her thoughts, her mind kept circling the whispered judgments from the previous night, words that clung to her like smoke. As the sun rose, weak and winter pale, the landscape shifted. Woods thickened around the narrow road, and the hills grew steeper, more rugged. Emilia caught glimpses of great black trees that looked older than any estate, their branches twisting in shapes that made her uneasy. She drew her cloak closer and forced her gaze to the window's edge, counting her breaths as though they might tether her to calm. When the carriage finally came to a halt at Ravenshire's gates, she felt the jolt travel through her entire body. A pair of wrought iron gates stood before her, tall enough to dwarf any person who approached. At their center gleamed the Ravenshire crest, a raven with its wings unfurled, forged from dark metal that caught the early light like obsidian. The gates opened slowly, almost ceremonially, and the carriage rolled through. The estate's long drive cut through fields resting under blankets of frost. Far ahead, Ravenshire Castle rose like an ancient sentinel, its stone walls towering against the sky. Emilia had expected something grim, perhaps even menacing, but as the carriage approached, she saw unexpected beauty in its architecture. Tall arched windows, turrets crowned with ivy, and balconies wrapped in delicate ironwork. It was imposing, yes, but not monstrous. Even so, she could not shake the sensation of being watched. When the carriage finally stopped at the front steps, a row of servants stood in quiet formation. Their expressions were courteous but reserved, as though uncertain how to greet a new mistress destined to reshape the rhythms of the house. A woman stepped forward, gray-haired, dignified, with the posture of someone who had served generations. "Welcome to Ravenshire, my lady," she said, offering a practiced curtsy. "I am Mrs. Harland, the housekeeper. His Grace awaits you inside the hall." Emilia forced a smile. "Thank you. I am grateful for your welcome." Mrs. Harland's gaze softened slightly, though she remained formal. "If I may, my lady, the castle holds memories, some gentle, some not. But it also holds hope for those who walk through its halls with an open heart." The comment was unexpected, almost intimate, and Emilia found herself unsure how to respond. She nodded politely and followed the housekeeper inside. The air shifted immediately. The entrance hall was vast, its ceilings reaching impossibly high, supported by stone columns carved with vines and ancient figures. Portraits of past dukes lined the walls, their gazes stern and unyielding. Emilia felt them studying her, silently judging whether she belonged. Before she could steady her breath, footsteps echoed across the floor. She turned and saw him. Adrian Ravenshire, the duke she had feared for weeks, stood at the far end of the hall. He was taller than she expected, with raven-dark hair and a posture that seemed sculpted from discipline. His attire was impeccable, a dark coat with subtle silver embroidery, gloves tucked beneath one arm, but his expression was unreadable. His eyes, gray like approaching storm clouds, rested on her with a calm she did not trust. "Lady Emilia," he said, his voice low and steady, "Ravenshire is honored by your arrival." His tone was proper, restrained, carrying none of the cruelty she had been warned of. Yet his composure felt almost too perfect, as though every gesture had been practiced so long he could no longer do otherwise. Emilia curtsied. "Your Grace, the honor is mine." For a long moment, neither moved. The hall around them felt suspended in some fragile stillness. Then Adrian stepped forward, offering his hand with measured courtesy. She hesitated only a second before placing her gloved fingers in his. His hand was warm, unexpectedly so. "You must be tired from your journey," he said. "Mrs. Harland will show you to your chambers. I have arranged for anything you may require." His gaze flickered, just briefly, to her face. "If there is anything amiss, you need only send word." It was a generous assurance, but something in the way he spoke suggested distance born not of disdain but caution, like a man afraid his presence might startle a wild bird. She thanked him, and he inclined his head with solemn grace before turning away. Emilia watched him go, struck by the contradiction he embodied, a figure spoken of with fear, yet moving as though burdened by the weight of his own shadow. Mrs. Harland led her through winding corridors lined with stained glass windows that cast muted colors across the floors. When they reached Emilia's chambers, the housekeeper paused before opening the door. "There is something His Grace asked to be left for you," she said quietly. "A token of welcome." Inside, the room was warm, the fire already crackling in the hearth. But what captured Emilia's attention was the object placed delicately upon the writing desk, a pendant on a fine chain of silver. The Ravenshire crest, carved in ivory, was encircled by a ring of mother-of-pearl. It was unexpectedly beautiful, softer than the house's imposing architecture. "A wedding gift," Mrs. Harland explained. "It belonged to the former Duchess." Emilia's breath caught. A gift of such significance felt almost too personal to accept from a man she had exchanged only a handful of words with. She traced the pendant with her fingertips, feeling the smooth ivory cool against her skin. "That is not the only gesture," the housekeeper added, almost reluctantly. "His Grace also prepared something else." She opened a drawer and revealed a leather-bound book filled with delicate botanical sketches. Roses, winter lilies, small clusters of snowdrops, all rendered with painstaking care. Each drawing was signed only A.R. Emilia stared in astonishment. "He made these?" "Yes, my lady." His Grace tends the conservatory himself. Few know of it. The revelation unsettled her more than any rumor she had ever heard. The Duke, this distant, silent figure, had drawn flowers with such tenderness? What kind of man hid behind a reputation so grim and yet carried gentleness in the turn of his pencil? Before she could ask more, a knock sounded at the chamber door. A footman entered, bowing respectfully. "My lady, a messenger has arrived. There is news from London." Emilia felt a chill. News. The footman hesitated. "A new article was printed in one of the papers. It concerns your marriage." Her stomach tightened. Mrs. Harland took the paper from him and skimmed the first lines, her face darkening. "It claims," she said slowly, "that you were sent here unwillingly, that you fainted upon hearing the Duke's name, that Ravenshire's newest bride is already desperate to escape." Emilia swayed as though struck. "But that is untrue. Scandal rarely concerns itself with truth," Mrs. Harland murmured. A silence settled before she added, "His Grace must see this." Emilia's pulse pounded. Her arrival had barely begun, and already London sought to tear her dignity apart. She felt the weight of the castle press in around her. The portraits, the history, the expectations. Then she looked again at the sketches, at the gentle lines, and felt something shift inside her. She was not the only one being wounded by the world. Perhaps the Duke bore deeper scars than she realized. And perhaps, in this house of memory and rumor, the truth would matter more than either of them yet understood. Eleanor had expected the corridor to feel colder the deeper she walked into it, yet the air grew warmer, as though the house itself exhaled in slow, watching breaths. The servants had gone silent after supper, glancing between her and the Duke with a mixture of pity and dread, as if they feared the very walls might hear their thoughts. By the time Eleanor reached the far end of the west wing, her pulse beat so loudly she wondered whether the door before her might rattle from the sound alone. It was the Duke's private study, the room no guest, servant, or even family member entered without invitation. Most of the whispers about Ravenshire began or ended with this door. She lifted her hand to knock, hesitated, lowered it, then gathered her courage and forced herself to knock twice. The sound was soft, but in the hush of the hallway it might as well have been thunder. She waited. Nothing. She tried again, louder this time, her knuckles briefly stinging with the force. A moment later the lock clicked, not with the briskness of irritation but the measured pace of someone who knew she would come. When the door swung open, she found the Duke standing in the flickering glow of a single oil lamp, his expression calm yet shadowed, as if he had been rehearsing a confession he feared he might not have the strength to deliver. "Eleanor," he said, her name leaving his lips with a gentleness that weakened her knees. "I hoped you would come. Please, enter." She stepped inside hesitantly, though her curiosity tugged her deeper. The study was smaller than she expected, lined floor to ceiling with dark mahogany shelves. Each row was filled not with books alone but with artifacts. Sealed letters, ivory boxes, faded sketches, rings tied with threads, pocket watches, and small tokens that looked as though they had belonged to generations of Ravenshires. Yet none of these objects drew her attention as strongly as the Duke himself, who closed the door behind them and turned the key. She tried to mask her flinch, but he noticed. "You're not in danger," he murmured. "The lock is only to keep prying ears away. Behind this door," he paused, searching for the right words, "lies the truth that even my mother fears." Eleanor felt a tremor course down her spine. She clasped her hands to steady them. "Then tell me. I cannot live this way, shadowed by rumors I'm not allowed to question." He moved past her, walking toward a long table at the center of the room. A ledger lay open upon it, its pages cramped with entries written in neat, disciplined handwriting. He rested his fingers on the edge of the parchment, breathing slowly as if fighting a memory. "I know the stories they tell," he said quietly. "That every Duke of Ravenshire grows cold, cruel, or violent. That our marriages end in misery. That our brides regret the moment they step into this house. Even my mother reinforces these tales to protect the family name. But the truth is simpler, and far stranger." Eleanor approached him cautiously, drawn to the steadiness in his voice. "What truth?" He lifted the ledger and offered it to her. When she opened it, she found sketches carefully tucked between the pages. They were portraits, women's faces, each rendered with striking tenderness. Beneath each drawing was a name and a date. Some were recent, others centuries old, yet every face shared a familiarity that made Eleanor's breath hitch. "They look like—" She stopped, swallowing. "Yes," he whispered. "They all look like you." She touched one sketch lightly, nearly afraid to smear the pencil strokes. "What does it mean?" For the first time since she'd met him, the Duke looked uncertain, vulnerable, even. "My family keeps records of every woman a Duke has ever loved, even unrequitedly. The Ravenshires become attached differently than most men. Some call it obsession, others call it devotion. But the truth is that once we love, truly love, we do not recover." The ledger was meant to make us cautious, to warn us how easily affection can turn to despair. The tragedies of my ancestors came not from cruelty, but from the unbearable weight of loving someone who did not love them back. Eleanor closed the ledger slowly. "Then why does your mother treat me as though I am a threat? As though marrying me would doom you?" His jaw tightened. "Because she thinks history will repeat itself. She believes I already love you, and she fears what that love will make of me." Eleanor's breath caught. "And does it? Do you?" He did not flinch or evade. "Yes." The word was soft, but its honesty hit her like a storm wind. "I have loved you from the moment I saw you in St. James's Square, before you knew my name, before you even looked my way. I kept my distance not because I doubted myself, but because I feared overwhelming you with the truth. And when you agreed to the marriage, I prayed you did so with at least a measure of willingness." Her heart tightened painfully. She had always believed he tolerated her, perhaps even pitied her, but certainly did not long for her. Hearing the opposite threatened to unravel every guarded belief she held about him. "Edmund," she rarely used his given name, and the faint shudder in his breath told her it startled him. "If what you feel is so strong, why keep this room locked away? Why hide it from the world?" He lifted a small wooden box from the table and placed it before her. "Because of this." Inside lay a ring, gold, simple, and worn by time. "It belonged to the first woman a Ravenshire loved," he said quietly. "Every generation passes it on to the Duke when he chooses his wife. I was given this ring the morning I formally courted you. It symbolizes not possession, but acceptance, the acceptance that our hearts, once tethered, cannot be untied." Eleanor stared at the ring, feeling an ache she could not name. "So you locked all this away, to protect me?" "To protect both of us," he admitted. "If my love frightened you, I needed space to temper it. If it comforted you, I needed you to come to me willingly, not out of duty or fear. Tonight, when you walked into this room, you showed me that you want to understand me. That alone is more than any Ravenshire has ever asked for." A silence stretched, but it was no longer tense. It was warm, alive. Eleanor placed the ring gently back into the box, then rested her hand atop it. "Edmund," she said softly, "I came here because I wanted to know the man behind the stories. And now that I do, I am no longer afraid." His eyes met hers, filled with a relief so deep it seemed almost painful. As he stepped toward her, he did not touch her, not yet. He waited, giving her the choice. She closed the space between them and took his hand first. The locked door behind them remained silent, but the shift between them was unmistakable, as though the entire house exhaled again, this time in approval. The morning after Eleanor stepped into the Duke's private world, Ravenshire Manor felt subtly transformed, as though the shift between them had seeped into the architecture itself. Sunlight spilled through the high windows in warmer hues, softening the edges of the grand corridors that had once intimidated her. Servants moved quietly, but for the first time their furtive glances held curiosity instead of pity, as if they sensed the household's long-buried tension had begun to ease. Eleanor descended the staircase with a steadiness she had not felt since her arrival, her mind replaying the night's confessions with a mixture of awe and trembling hope. She had expected fear to linger. Instead, she carried a clarity she did not yet know how to name. She found Edmund in the breakfast room, standing beside the window with a letter in his hand. He looked up at her entrance, and the way his expression softened, openly, without restraint, told her he no longer intended to keep any part of himself hidden. "Good morning," he said, his voice low but warm. "I wasn't sure if you would join me, or if last night overwhelmed you." "It didn't overwhelm me," she replied, taking a breath as she moved toward him. "It simply changed things." He placed the letter on the table, as if prepared to set aside any duty for her. "Then tell me how." She hesitated, because the change felt too delicate to articulate. But she met his gaze and forced herself to speak plainly. "I no longer fear you. Not your family's reputation, nor the stories whispered about this house. For the first time, I feel like I am not walking into a life that was forced upon me. I am choosing it." His shoulders relaxed, the tension easing from him like a held breath finally released. "You do not know how long I waited to hear that," he murmured. "My mother believes choice is a luxury our lineage cannot afford. She thinks love makes us reckless, but I believe the lack of it is what destroys us." Eleanor approached the table and traced her fingers along the wooden box that still held the ancestral ring he had shown her. Its presence grounded her. "What will your mother say," she asked carefully, "when she learns you've told me everything?" Edmund let out a slow exhale. "She will not approve. But it is time she understands that silence only sharpens fear. The House of Ravenshire has lived too long under the weight of its own myths. I intend to speak with her today, openly, honestly, and I want you there with me." Her heart gave an anxious tremble. Facing the Duchess was no small matter. The woman guarded tradition with the ferocity of a sovereign. Yet running from her now would undo every step Eleanor had taken. She nodded. "Then I will stand beside you." Edmund offered his arm, and together they walked to the east wing, where the Duchess kept her morning rooms. The portraits of past dukes lined the corridor like silent judges, but Eleanor no longer saw menace in them, only stories untold, tragedies misunderstood. When they reached the tall double doors, Edmund knocked once before entering, his presence calm but resolute. The Duchess sat at a delicate writing desk, her posture perfect, her gown a crisp dove gray that suited her severe elegance. She regarded them with narrowed eyes, her expression unreadable. "You both come to me at once," she said coolly. "That is rarely a sign of peace." Edmund did not bow. He simply inclined his head with quiet authority. "Mother, there are matters we must address. I will speak truthfully, and I ask that you listen without interruption." Her brows rose, but she folded her hands and waited. Eleanor stood slightly behind Edmund, though he reached back and drew her subtly to his side, a gesture that did not escape the Duchess's notice. "I have told Eleanor everything," Edmund announced. "The family ledger, the ring, the history of the Ravenshire men, the truth behind our so-called curse." A flicker, barely perceptible, passed across the Duchess's composed face. "You had no right," she said softly, danger simmering beneath her tone. "Those records exist to protect the family, not to burden an outsider with matters she cannot comprehend." Eleanor gathered her courage. "I am not burdened," she said. "I am relieved to finally understand the truth. You feared I would run, but silence would have driven me far faster." The Duchess turned her gaze on her, sharp as a blade. "You presume much, my girl. You think because my son has softened toward you, the house will do the same? You have no idea what this lineage demands." "Then teach me," Eleanor replied, steadying her voice. "But do not shut me out." The Duchess's eyes narrowed further, studying her with a scrutiny that felt almost surgical. After a long moment she shifted her gaze to Edmund. "And you?" she demanded. "Do you intend to repeat the mistakes of your forefathers? To lose yourself so completely in affection that you neglect your duties? I have seen what love does to a Ravenshire man." Edmund stepped closer to Eleanor, his voice gaining strength. "Then you saw it imperfectly. Love is not our downfall. Fear is. Concealment. Isolation. The refusal to let others understand us. I will not inherit this title by hiding the truth from my wife." Silence filled the room, thick enough to stir the air. The Duchess's jaw clenched, and for a moment Eleanor thought she might dismiss them both. But then something in her expression wavered, not softened exactly, but fractured. A memory flickered behind her eyes, and Eleanor understood that the Duchess, too, had once loved a Ravenshire man. And perhaps she had lost more to that love than she dared say aloud. Finally, the Duchess spoke in a voice stripped of its earlier steel. "If you must walk this path," she said, "then walk it with clarity. Do not let history blind you. And do not make your wife bear the cost of your choices." Edmund bowed his head slightly. "I intend to protect her, not by hiding the truth, but by sharing it." The Duchess looked at Eleanor again, this time without hostility. "Then, child," she said, "you have chosen a difficult life. But perhaps difficulty is not always a curse." A breath Eleanor hadn't realized she held escaped her. The air shifted, not quite acceptance, but not rejection either. Something in between. Something workable. When they left the Duchess's rooms, Edmund did not speak until they reached the quiet of the corridor. Then he turned to Eleanor, took her hands in his, and said with fierce simplicity, "We have faced the house. Now let us build something stronger than its stories." Eleanor smiled, the weight of fear finally lifting from her. "Together," she said. And for the first time, Edmund believed, fully without doubt, that the reputation which had feared love for generations had finally found it.